So episode 15 of Dororo has arrived, and generally I'd wait to talk about the visual presentation of the episode till closer to the end of the review, story and characters, animation, sound, all that fun stuff in that order. But I do think we gotta talk about the visuals first and foremost, and I think a lot of people are gonna throw around the term budget or just other nonsensical nonsense that is going to explain why the episode looked the way it did, because it definitely looked a lot different, almost like it was outsourced, almost like they were crunching on time. They didn't have time to finish the episode. There was a lot of weird transitions and cuts that we haven't seen in the past 14 episodes. And surprisingly, this may come as a surprise to some of you, this wasn't a budget or time constraint thing. This was really all stylistic choice. Back around the episode 4 or 6 mark, one of those two, there was a chief director who was essentially hyping up an episode that they were working on, and that episode was episode 15. This episode wasn't being constrained by time or anything like that. This episode looked and functioned the way it did because that was his style. I believe it's the same person who actually worked on one of the Gurren Lagann episodes that had a very unique look to it that some people loved and other people hated. Now, I actually don't really like the overall visual presentation to this episode, but I do understand that it can be an artistic choice. I don't agree with the artistic choice, but it was an artistic choice. There's a lot of weird jump cuts, a lot of fade in, fade out transitions, a lot of holding on to wider shots that typically you would think, oh, that's a time constraint thing, they're doing it, but really was more of an artistic thing than anything. I do think a director should try to keep the style closer to what it was because we are 15 weeks in, but the fact that this man only worked on this episode and the ending visuals, I'm honestly okay with the episode looking the way it did, just because it was a one and done thing and it shouldn't happen for the future episodes. It's interesting when different people have ideas of how to handle a story, because this episode was really interesting as it's a smaller picture to what's going to happen to this kingdom once Hyakkimaru does regain his body. This entire village is screwed by the time he regains his spine. So it's actually kind of interesting seeing how different this episode looked in that regard because it was such a different feeling episode. Now, some of the visuals I actually did really like with this episode in terms of how different the style looked, especially when Hyakkimaru did burn this demon. It had this loose and very vibrant and almost explosive designs to really make it feel like this was a very different fight. This wasn't supposed to be a very long and dragged out fight, but rather one to really show you the aftermath of what's going to happen as you burn this demon. An entire village essentially got burned in the process, and to just see where they went afterwards was interesting. Visually, this was my least favorite looking episode. I wasn't a fan of the style and the jump cuts, things like that. It just wasn't for me, but I can forgive it for one episode. In fact, I actually at first was thinking, well, if they did run into a production crunch, the fact that it took 15 episodes to get here is actually kind of impressive, but knowing who actually directed the episode and pretty much kind of made it into what it was, actually kind of gives me a sigh of relief knowing that this shouldn't be a common thing going forward into the second core. But the overall theme to this episode was really interesting because even though there was almost like a deal with the demons in this very small but isolated kind of location, it still helped people. These people were prospering. They had food, they had pretty much security. Yes, there was some pretty shady things going on with kind of killing travelers to feed their demons, things like that, but it was interesting to see almost like it was supposed to show the viewer that this is a very small scale of what's going to happen once Hyakkimaru does regain his full body, which I kind of liked because this is something I've been kind of reinforcing almost week by week, is that how important it is that we have one man who can essentially destroy an entire kingdom once he regains his body. Sure, some of the higher-ups and overall kind of political figures in this kingdom are quote-unquote evil. It doesn't stop the fact that there are innocent people in the crossfire who can really get screwed over, and some of these people who are just, living their lives, probably didn't even know everything that was going on, was pretty interesting. And there was so many weird subtle clues throughout this episode of just, it seemed like the villagers knew more than they should, and anytime you brought up certain things, they got really shady. And then to just see how human of a reaction they had once everything was gone really touched me, because even though some of them probably knew what was going on, if not all of them in terms of they were willing to sacrifice innocent people, when you see their entire home go up in flames and then you see Dororo really reflect on is this the correct outcome? Is really getting a body part worth burning an entire village? And then you have Hyakkimaru just being I don't care about anything, I'm going to kill demons. it's a really important moment because this is who he is becoming. He's becoming a man who only cares about one thing, killing demons. That's all he cares. If people get in the crossfire, it doesn't matter. And for someone like Dororo, that probably makes her feel like, well, is it okay if I get caught in the crossfire? What if I get killed because you're just determined on getting demon parts back? It's really interesting because essentially they get split apart at the end of the episode. He's so lost in his own thoughts of just killing demons, he doesn't care about anything, that it took him so long to even realize that Dororo wasn't even trailing behind him. And Dororo is about to get kidnapped by people who want the map on her back. Probably the logical direction it will go to is essentially you'll have Hyakkimaru come in, save the day, protect Dororo, and then all will be well, they'll make up, they'll basically kind of come to terms, and maybe he'll cool down a bit on just killing demons and not caring about anyone in the crossfire. But you have such a weird concept because on one hand you think, okay, a lot of this village, like, they probably were okay with what went down at that basically orphanage. They were fine if innocent kids got burned down so they could continue to live, but still, does that excuse burning down their entire village? It's a really hard thing to answer, and I think it's not supposed to be answered. I think you're just supposed to watch and see where should it go, and that's what I like about Dororo as a story, is it has such a complex end goal of you could see a way for Hyakkimaru to regain what he's lost, but also help those in the process with probably that map on Dororo's back. And that makes me incredibly excited. I thought when he was regaining his spine was some of the coolest imagery we've seen, because I actually thought there was a spine, like a real spine, going into his back, and then you see it kind of pop off because it was just like one of the mechanical devices in his body to let him move around. Like, it's kind of interesting. So I'm sort of curious if maybe he has been regaining body parts after he's been killing demons. It's just there's some of the smaller organs that maybe we can't see, unlike a spine, which obviously would pop out of his body, things like that. So maybe he regained a liver or a kidney, things like that. I'm curious if he has been regaining body parts, we just haven't noticed them just because of something like that, or if he hasn't actually been killing demons, but just lesser ghouls all this time, and we just thought he was killing demons, something to that nature. But to see his spine literally pop out and then regrow, I mean, that's probably not the worst thing he's regained to kind of penalize him, but still, if he gets hit in the back now, he's probably going to feel it a lot more than he did up to this point. This episode was a weird one to say the least. I think for being the 15th episode, it's kind of jarring coming into this episode, seeing such a different style. But I also think the style of storytelling seen here is a lot different than we've seen up to this point. I mean, literally, our central duo got separated because of just his raw determination to kill demons and not care about anyone else in the process, making Dororo actually feel fear for her bro. And I think that's important. I think there was some interesting techniques used. I think some of the fire techniques and just even some of the cutting that they used in this episode actually got across a pretty interesting narrative, but there was also a lot of stuff that I was just like, you know what, I'm not a fan of how often you're cutting and fading into different shots or reusing shots, but sometimes people have artistic visions and you just gotta say, well, that's what they wanted to do, that's what they wanted to do. I mean, I love the painting Starry Night, it's my favorite piece of artwork ever made, and some people may look at that and say it's an absolute piece of shit. I mean, it's all preference when it comes to art, right? But hey, everyone's gonna have their opinions. Everyone's gonna think one thing about the episode. Some people will say it's, you know, quote-unquote budget issues. Some people are gonna say it looks amazing. Maybe it really is like they love the directing choices, maybe they love just how it looks. It's all gonna be opinion-based, but for me, visually, I didn't really like the episode. I thought it was a little too drastic and jarring from what we've seen up to this point. But in terms of thematics and just overall storytelling, it's pretty much everything that I've loved from episode 1 through 14, so it's not that different, and I think really shows what Hyakkimaru can become in the future if he keeps going down this path of only caring about killing demons and not about a village as a whole. Because yes, he's had a very shitty life, but he has someone who actually is trying to guide him to a proper path, not get lost in rage killing people for killing someone he loves, or just wanting to kill demons because he wants his body back. I think he needs to take a long, hard look of what he wants to do, go at it logically rather than emotionally, and only time will tell where he really wants to go, and that makes me excited. I think the future of Dororo, after this episode, even as kind of weird as it may look, it's so interesting to see how much it kind of shook the foundation of this story and where it could go in the future. My favorite part about Dororo is how instead of focusing on the demons for the entire run, like the first half of the story was really kind of bound and determined to make sure the demons were the focus for the most part. But the second core, rather than keeping the focus on the demons, is more focusing on Hyakkimaru and his end goal, because really the story boils down to what will happen once a man who had everything stolen from him regains his body. What will the future of an entire kingdom looks like? And that's what makes me love this story so much, is rather than focus on the simplistic aspect to the show, which are the demons and regaining a body part, rather, the actual focus is on the political aftermath of what will happen when a man regains what is owed to him at the cost of essentially everyone's life. And that's really exciting, and I'm really glad Map is going this route rather than keeping the focus on just having cool action and cool demon fights, but rather really showing the character relationships and what actually happens on a deeper level to an entire kingdom. For everyone though who did watch episode 15 of Dororo, what did you think of the visual storytelling? Were you a fan of the directing, the very unique style that it went for, or were you like me, you were like, it looked a little too weird, but also, even if you disliked or liked the visual presentation, did you still like the story content? Because I think the story content was just as interesting as pretty much every episode up to this point. But hey, everyone's gonna have their opinions and their own thoughts, what it looked like, what it functioned like in terms of both storytelling and visual presentation. So let me know yours down in the comment section below. And if you did enjoy this video, also leave a like and hit that subscribe button if you happen to be new around here. But until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.